This woman set her husband's watch 10 minutes back and ruined his life. The title of the movie is Chaos Theory. Let's go! Preparations for a wedding ceremony are underway in a large, beautiful house. We see the beautiful bride Jessie wearing a white dress and her anxious groom Ed. He recalls that his beloved has not always been faithful to him and even wants to cancel the wedding. And although his best friend assures the guy that everything will be fine, the groom attempts to escape. The bride's father Frank Allen gets in his way, pours the guy some tequila and tells him the story of his life. Many years ago, he was an aspiring entrepreneur in love with a beautiful girl named Susan. The problem is that his best friend Buddy liked her as well. At the New Year's Eve party, everyone is talking about their wishes and plans, and Susan confessed that she wants to buy a red bike and marry one of her friends. All the guys raise their hands, and at that moment, the chimes start to strike, and Susan kisses Frank. The choice is made. About 10 years pass. Susan and Frank are awakened by their young daughter Jessie. The girl takes her daddy to the attic to watch the sunrise and make wishes together. The family eats breakfast, and Frank looks for his to-do list for the day. We find out that his entire life is literally scheduled to the minute. This infuriates Susan so much that she sets her husband's clock 10 minutes back. Discovering this, Frank panics and runs out of the house, while his wife gets a call from their friend Buddy, who immediately starts flirting with her. Frank drives to work and misses the ferry for the first time in his life, and the next one will arrive only in an hour. Despite being significantly late, the man still holds a regular lecture on the subject of proper attitude to time. He talks about the importance of making a to-do list for the day since life is chaos, and it is important to learn how to manage it. After the lecture, Frank meets with Buddy and complains that Susan set his watch 10 minutes back and ruined his whole day. Buddy thinks it's an innocent joke and decides to hook up with a couple of attractive girls. A pretty blonde comes up to Frank and thanks him for the interesting lecture. Her name is Paula, and she offers the man to have a drink together. After a few cocktails, Frank confesses that he is very nervous to speak in front of a large audience, so he imagines all the people in the room naked. This makes him feel relaxed. After getting drunk, Paula accidentally breaks a stack of glasses and says that she needs to use the restroom, but she has a phobia of public toilets, so the girl asks Frank for permission to use his bathroom. While she does her business there, Frank confesses that he's been married for 8 years and is raising a wonderful daughter. Despite this, Paula comes out of the bathroom and starts hitting on the protagonist. At this moment, Frank receives a phone call from his wife, and the man immediately runs away from the new girlfriend. The phone rings again and Paula answers it. Susan is shocked that her husband is spending time with another woman. Meanwhile, Frank himself is rushing home but gets into an accident. There is a pregnant woman who is already in labor in the other car, so the protagonist takes her to the hospital. Her name is Nancy, and she doesn't want to give birth at all. At the hospital, Frank is mistaken for Nancy's husband and is asked to fill out some paperwork. In the morning, a phone call rings at his house. A nurse from the hospital tells Susan that she is looking for Mr. Allen, because Mrs. Allen has run away from the hospital after giving birth. Susan is shocked, for it is she who is Mrs. Allen. At that moment, Frank comes home and his wife immediately argues with him and even drives him out of the house. The man returns to the hospital and berates the staff for not looking after Nancy, and then asks his lawyer friend for advice. He says that the only solution is to take a DNA test. Frank tries to call his wife, but their friend Ken picks up the phone and insists that Susan doesn't want to see him. There's no other option. The man takes a DNA test so his wife will finally believe him. Frank picks up Jessie from school and promises his daughter that he and her mom will soon reconcile. The girl comes home dressed in a princess costume and starts carrying a rodent in a cage. She assures her mom that she has the best dad in the world. Here are the DNA results. Frank is definitely not the father of this baby, as he can't have children at all because of an extra X chromosome. But how can this be? Frank does have a daughter. The man is desperate. Does it mean that his entire family life has been a lie? He drives to the seashore and cries bitterly. neglecting the marvelous sunset. When Frank returns home, he has an argument with his wife, accusing her of being unfaithful to him, and then goes to a bar for a drink. Then he meets the ferryman, who refused to let him on the ferry when he was late, and goes outside to fight with him. Frank wins and returns to the bar. A pretty brunette named Tracy sits next to him, and the man includes spending time with her on his to-do list. In the morning, Nancy arrives at Frank's house with a small baby and tells Susan that she is very grateful to the man for his kindness. And of course, it is not his baby. At work, a co-worker tells Susan about Frank beating up the ferryman in a bar and then buying himself a red bike. The protagonist is racing around town without a helmet, hoping to get into an accident and end his misery. Meanwhile, Susan visits Buddy and asks him for advice. The man promises to help her and heads to Frank. He advises his friend to reconcile with his wife. However, the main character replies that he won't return home. He doesn't want to live according to a plan anymore. It's time to make a spontaneous decision. For example, to go to a hockey game. There, Frank writes down all 3 of his new wishes and randomly picks one of them. He has to run naked on the hockey ring. Frank immediately starts taking off his clothes and at the same time admits to his friend that Jessie is not his daughter. And yes, he fulfills his wish. Buddy rushes to see Susan. He remembers that 8 years ago, just before New Year's Eve, they spent the night together, and therefore Jessie is his daughter. The man sees the girl outside a school and immediately asks when is her birthday. He finds out that she turns 8 in August. Buddy goes to Susan and demands an explanation from her. Yeah, it makes sense. Frank has been raising someone else's daughter for years, thinking it was his child. Susan is horrified, realizing that now her husband knows the whole truth. Buddy confesses his love for her, but the woman pushes him away and leaves. Frank is late again for his lecture on time management. He says that planning doesn't make anyone happy. Passion and impulses, spontaneous decisions, and rash actions are very important for fulfilling life. After finishing the lecture, Frank goes to a bar. A great party takes place there, and the man notices Paula among the guests. This time, he is no longer as modest as he was on their first meeting. In the morning, Frank doesn't remember anything. It turns out that he passed out at the most interesting point and cried in his sleep for 2 hours. Susan sends him 33 messages, but Frank doesn't answer any of them. A courier shows up on her doorstep with a bouquet of red roses and a note. Buddy approaches the school where Susan works. He is holding another bouquet. However, the woman runs away from him again. Buddy catches up with her and confesses his love. Frank comes home at night. Susan immediately apologizes to him and declares that he is Jessie's father. Sure, not biologically, but he is the one who raised and educated this girl as his own daughter. At this point, Jessie calls out to her mom and complains that she had a nightmare. While Susan is tucking her daughter in, Frank notices a bouquet of roses and a note on the table. This is how he learns that Jessie's father is his close friend Buddy. Susan returns, but Frank has already left the house. She looks at the flowers and the note and immediately realizes everything. Next to it lies Frank's wedding ring. Meanwhile, the protagonist returns to the rented apartment and breaks everything in it, then goes to a supermarket, finds a selection of weapons and buys a rifle, telling the salesman that he needs it for a duck hunt. In fact, Frank is going to deal with Buddy. A lawyer friend tells Buddy about Frank's trip to the lake. Scared that the man will do something stupid, he tells Susan everything and goes there. Susan and her daughter get in the car and rush to the lake as well. Buddy finds Frank at the lake house, and the man decide to go boating. At one moment, the main character pulls out a rifle and fires the first shot. Fortunately, this time he hits only the boat. Water flows quickly through the breach, and the men are quite far from shore. Frank looks for a life jacket. There is only one on the boat, so the friends immediately start fighting over it. Buddy manages to throw the rifle into the water in the process. Susan and Jessie show up to the pier and immediately run to call the police. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, Frank and Buddy fall out of the boat and continue to fight even in the water. Susan returns to the shore with binoculars in hand, but there is no one in the water anymore. The police show up to the pier, but the cops can't find anyone either. The thing is, Frank and Buddy manage to reach the opposite shore. There, they finally stop fighting and decide to look for a way home through the dense forest. Frank admits that he can never forget the past and asks Buddy to tell Susan that he supposedly drowned in the lake. But his friend refuses, stating that both his wife and daughter love no one but Frank. Buddy returns home and the cops immediately offer him a warm blanket. Frank stays in the woods. Will he ever be able to forgive his wife? Jessie stares sadly out the window. She writes only one word on the fogged glass: Dad, and makes a wish for him to come back. And it comes true. Frank walks over to the window, sees the writing, and in a second his daughter falls into his arms. Susan also runs to hug her husband. The adult Frank finishes his story. He tells Ed that the most important thing in every person's life is love. Susan joins them. We see that after many years, they are still deeply in love with each other, and so the wedding ceremony begins. Frank walks his daughter down the aisle, and Ed looks lovingly at his bride. It's a real happy ending. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you don't wish to be in the shoes of this deceived man.